I had a question in the comments last week from Kat asking me the difference between mixing colours with Inktense and mixing colours with watercolour, and I didn't feel that my answer was very helpful because basically I was saying that they're two very different products, so we can't really compare them. But I did think I would do a video just to talk about the colour mixing with the Inktense, the properties of the Inktense and why they differ so much from the watercolour and the applications that we might want to give the Inktense. So to begin with, I've just put the three primaries down. This side I've used the Sennelier Travel Set watercolours, and this side is the Inktense from the XL set. So this is the XL set that Derwent kindly gave me a few weeks ago, and this is the set that I've had for a long time. And if you have a look inside, I'll just get the lid off, you can see I've used these a lot. So this is the set of 24. Now, if we look on the back of here, it talks about the properties and, you know, why they're such a different media to the watercolour. So basically, there are ink blocks that are water soluble, so they're very different pigment wise, and they dry with quite an inky look to them. But once dry, they're permanent, so you can't lift them, and that way you can layer them up. And the other thing is, obviously you can pick them up and draw with them in the way that you couldn't do with your watercolour. So we'll look at that to begin with, the fact that you can't lift these off. So I've got a nice synthetic brush here that I would use for lifting colour out of watercolour. And if we look, I've got a damp brush, and you're not going to lift that Inktense off. Same damp brush, and look at how much watercolour is lifting off there. Of course it depends with the colour. Red tends to be more staining, so if we have a look at the red here, you won't lift it off just as easily. It's not too bad actually, as you do with the blue. But there's your difference. This is permanent and this can be lifted off. So one way of mixing your colours in Inktense, and with watercolour of course, is to allow the colours to dry like I have here and then put another layer over the top. So with the yellow, if you wanted to make that green, we'll use this blue and pop it straight over the top, and the two mix together on the page, one layer over another to make that green. And we'll do with this with each of the colours. So this was the blue I used in the watercolour. So you have to be more careful when working with watercolour that you don't lift the colour from underneath. But as I've said in previous videos, when you're working wet onto dry in this way, always imagine you're painting on something like glass and you're trying not to break it, so you're painting very delicately. So let's make this one orange by adding the yellow over the top. So I think with that one, the red of the Inktense is much more dominant than the yellow. So it's becoming quite difficult to get any kind of coverage. But yeah, we'll eventually get a nice orange colour there. And then the same with the watercolour. Again, obviously red's quite a dominant colour, so you need a little bit more of the yellow than you had of the red underneath. And let's make this purple or violet. So that's a nice deep rich colour there with that red over the top. That could be, you could go really dark in some areas of your painting with that colour. That's made a nice contrast there. And then the red that we had, again, you've got a really nice deep dark purple that you could use for some shadows and things. So if you look at those, they're very similar. I mean, these aren't the same colours, I've just picked three primaries, but you know, colour wise you're very similar, but you've got a very different feel. You've got much more of the paper showing through here. This is quite opaque, this red, even the yellow is quite opaque compared to the watercolours. So one way of mixing of course is on the paper, as we've just done, and you can either do that wet in wet or wet on dry. Another way of course is to mix your colours before you put them on the paper, doing that on the palette. So now we'll do that with the first two colours that we had, which was the yellow on this one mixed with this blue. I've added quite a bit more water there than the original one had, but you can see that's a nice usable green that you could use for some landscapes. And if we look at the watercolour, again we'll use a similar amount of water so that we're comparing light with light. So application wise, they go on pretty similar. That's made a brighter yellow. I think I've perhaps got a bit more yellow in there than, wrong one, than I had blue. You can make a bluer green as well. That's more like that one. So one of the differences is the way they dry as well. Watercolours tend to bloom more, tend to move around more. The Inktense tend to sit more on the paper where you've put them, and you don't get those blooming effects just the same. So if we look at the set here, there are one or two that tend to granulate a little bit. This is one of them. Now if you want to know the names of the colours, they do have them on the Derwent website, and I did print that off and popped it on the studio wall, and that's quite handy because they do have the numbers written on the blocks, but obviously when you've used them over several years like I have with these, then you will find that those numbers rub off. So I'm just going to show you this one. I don't know if it'll show to the camera, but this is very grainy, this colour, and it's quite useful for things like paths and walls. And if you mix it with one of your blues, it's a bit of a cerulean colour which you could make into, you know, a limestone colour for a landscape, you get that granulation and separation in the same way that you do with some of your watercolours. But in general, most of the Inktense aren't like that. They're much flatter colours. Now I like working with mixed media, and I like working with ink and watercolour, and you'll notice I do a lot of ink and watercolour tutorials here on YouTube. I like the fact that you can combine that enjoyment of both the drawing and the painting, so you can get your drawing down and do that quite detailed if you want to, and then you can have be a bit looser and have fun putting your watercolours on, and so you've got that really lovely combination between the lines and the loose paintwork. Now the thing about Inktense is you've got that in one product. You can do both the drawing and the painting with one product, so really it's a mixed media product of its own, on its own, without introducing anything else. I mean, I do introduce other things to it. I love using it in lots of different mixed media, but the fact that you can both draw and paint with one thing, I really like. So let's have a look. We'll perhaps just use one of the darker colours here. So you could draw something. I don't know what I'm going to draw. I'll just draw maybe a hill or something, and then you can paint as well. So you've got your lines there. And then you can go on and put some colour on. And you can do this and make a very detailed and photographic study, or you can make it very, very loose and expressive. You can leave some of the lines dry, or you can add water to them. So there's all sorts of ways you can use these, and you end up with something that's looking very much like a mixed media painting just with using the one product. So I haven't really used these big ones to the best effect yet, because what I really need to do is get a huge piece of paper or canvas and lay down lots of colour with them and really use them quite quickly. You can get a big amount of colour down quite quickly, and then you can be quite expressive with them. So you can leave them like that. You can go on top with other colours, let the colours mix on the paper. There are just so many ways that you can use these, and even after you've done your painting, you can then come back on top if you want. Let's get a completely different colour, let's get a pink, and they sort of dissolve into the water, so you can still draw. You can go back and do more drawing, and you can get some very interesting lines by allowing them to kind of melt into where it's wet there. So you can either have them quite distinct lines, or you can have these kind of melty lines where the paper's wet. So there's so many applications for these, for mark making, for being expressive, and having a bit of fun with them. and like I say, you can use them with other materials as well. So I just wanted to really talk today. I'm hoping that's been useful to you. If there's anything else you want to know, please put it in the comments below, but I just really wanted to talk about the difference and why the colour mixing is very different. So you can see now how these have run into each other. You don't perhaps get these kind of effects with the Inktense because they're a completely different product. But the good thing about them is this permanence, so you can layer up and layer up, and you can get darker and darker in some areas for your really dark shadows. Of course, your watercolour tend to be more transparent, but of course that's all down to how much water you add as well. Okay, so if you want me to do some more videos with anything to do with Inktense, like I said, I probably will perhaps do another one using a much bigger piece of paper and having a bit more fun with these big blocks and getting a bit more expressive with them. Okay, but that's all for today, just a quick video just to talk about that. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.